Hello, friends. Today we are talking about a man whose story does not fit neatly into any category. He was a mass murderer. He commanded one of the most lethal killing units in the entire Nazi apparatus. He watched tens of thousands of human beings get shot into mass graves in the forests of the Soviet Union. And then he turned against the regime he had served. He joined the plot to kill Adolf Hitler. He risked everything. And in the end, he was caught, tortured, and hanged by the system he had helped build. His name was Artur Nebe. And his story is one of the most complicated, most disturbing, and most fascinating stories of the entire Nazi era. Because it forces us to ask a question that has no comfortable answer. Can a mass murderer also be a hero of the resistance? Can a man who commanded genocide also be called a man of conscience? There is no easy answer. But the question itself tells us something important about how evil systems work and what they do to the people inside them. Artur Nebe was born on November 13th, 1894, in Berlin. He was a city boy, not from a military family or a provincial background. He studied law briefly before the First World War interrupted everything. He served as an infantry officer, was wounded, came home in 1918 to a defeated and humiliated Germany. Like millions of other veterans, he struggled to find his place in the chaos of the Weimar Republic. He drifted into police work. He joined the Criminal Investigation Division of the Berlin Police and discovered that he was genuinely good at it. He had an analytical mind. He was methodical. He understood how criminals thought. He rose steadily through the ranks of the German criminal police throughout the 1920s and early 1930s, building a reputation as one of the most capable detectives in the country. And then Hitler came to power in 1933, and Nebe made a choice. He joined the Nazi Party. He joined the SS. He aligned himself with the new regime. Now, historians have debated for decades whether Nebe was a true believer or an opportunist, whether he genuinely believed in National Socialism, or whether he simply saw which way the wind was blowing and made the calculation that joining was better than resisting. The honest answer is that we do not know for certain. What we know is that he joined, that he cooperated, that he helped the new regime consolidate control over the German police apparatus, and that whatever his private beliefs were, his public actions in the 1930s were those of a committed servant of the Nazi state. He rose quickly under the new regime. By 1936, he was appointed head of the Reichskriminalpolizeiamt, the Reich Criminal Police Office, known as the Kripo. This was one of the most powerful law enforcement positions in Germany. The Kripo handled serious criminal investigations across the entire country. Under Nebe's leadership, it was integrated into the broader SS and police apparatus that Himmler was building. It became part of the RSHA, the Reich Security Main Office, the organization that Reinhard Heydrich controlled and that Kaltenbrunner later took over. Nebe was now one of the senior figures in the Nazi security state. He had an office in Berlin. He had subordinates across the country. He had power. And there is evidence, fragmentary and disputed, that even in this period he was making quiet contact with people who had doubts about the regime. That he was beginning, very cautiously, to build relationships with men who might one day oppose Hitler. But whatever quiet doubts Nebe may have harbored in the late 1930s, they did not stop him from doing what he did in the summer of 1941. And what he did in the summer of 1941 is the central, inescapable, defining fact of his entire life. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, the killing units followed close behind the advancing armies. The Einsatzgruppen. 4 mobile killing squads, each assigned to a different sector of the front. Their mission was explicit, and it was genocidal. They were to kill Jews, Soviet commissars, Roma, and anyone else deemed an enemy of the Reich in the occupied territories. They were to kill them systematically, efficiently, completely. This was not a side effect of the invasion. This was a planned, organized, deliberate mass murder operation that had been prepared before the first German soldier crossed the Soviet border. Artur Nebe volunteered to command one of these units. Let that sink in for a moment. He was not ordered to take the command. He was not conscripted or coerced. He asked for it. He was given command of Einsatzgruppe B, which operated in the central sector of the Eastern Front, in the territories of Belarus and Western Russia. And over the following months, Einsatzgruppe B murdered approximately 45,000 human beings, men, women, and children. Shot in forests and ravines and on the edges of mass graves that the victims were sometimes forced to dig themselves. The killings were not quick or clean in the way that the cold, bureaucratic language of the SS reports might suggest. They were chaotic and traumatic, even for the perpetrators. The shooters often had to drink heavily to get through a day's work. Some had psychological breakdowns. The scale of the killing created logistical problems. Mass graves had to be dug large enough. Enough ammunition had to be available. The victims had to be moved to the killing sites without provoking panic or resistance. Nebe's unit worked through these problems methodically. They refined their techniques. They figured out how to kill more people more efficiently. And here is one of the most disturbing details of Nebe's story. He was not satisfied with shooting as the primary method of killing. He began experimenting with alternatives. In the town of Mogilev in September 1941, Nebe conducted experiments using explosives to kill mental patients from a local psychiatric institution. He packed patients into a bunker and detonated explosives. The results were, from his perspective, unsatisfactory. The killing was not efficient enough. He then experimented with piping exhaust fumes from a vehicle into a sealed space. This was one of the early experiments with what would become the gas van, a mobile killing unit that used carbon monoxide from engine exhaust to murder victims. The technology that Nebe helped develop and test in Mogilev was later deployed across the occupied territories and contributed to the murder of hundreds of thousands of people. Artur Nebe, the future resistance figure, was one of the inventors of mobile gas chambers. He left the Eastern Front in late 1941 and returned to his desk job in Berlin as head of the Kripo. The reasons for his departure are not entirely clear. Some historians have suggested that the experience of commanding mass murder had deepened whatever doubts he already had about the regime. That what he saw and did on the Eastern Front pushed him further toward the resistance. Others are more skeptical, pointing out that senior SS officers rotated through field commands regularly and that his departure may have had nothing to do with moral crisis. What is clear is that after returning to Berlin, Nebe began moving more deliberately toward the resistance network that was slowly forming around certain military and civilian figures who wanted to remove Hitler. This network would eventually coalesce into the July 20th plot of 1944, the most serious attempt on Hitler's life of the entire war. Nebe made contact with key figures in this network. He shared intelligence. He provided information about SS and police operations that was useful to the conspirators. He was not at the center of the plot. He was not one of the men who designed and executed the assassination attempt itself, but he was connected. He was known to the conspirators, and he had committed himself, at least in his own mind, to the goal of removing Hitler. On July 20th, 1944, Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg placed a briefcase bomb under a table in Hitler's conference room at the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia. The bomb exploded. Hitler survived. The thick oak table leg had partially shielded him from the blast. 4 people in the room died. Hitler walked away with a perforated eardrum and some superficial injuries. And within hours, the Nazi regime was hunting down everyone connected to the conspiracy. The immediate leaders of the plot were arrested and executed within days. Von Stauffenberg was shot in the courtyard of the Bendler block in Berlin on the night of July 20th itself. Others were arrested and put through the People's Court, where the judge Roland Freisler screamed at them and humiliated them before sentencing them to death. They were hanged with piano wire from meat hooks at Plötzensee Prison, their deaths filmed for Hitler to watch. Nebe fled. He had been identified as connected to the conspiracy, and he knew what was coming if he was caught. He went underground. He had contacts, resources, and knowledge of the police apparatus that he could use to stay hidden. For months he managed to evade capture. He moved between safe houses. He changed his identity. He used every skill he had developed over a career in criminal investigation to stay one step ahead of the men hunting him. But the Gestapo was thorough and relentless. In January 1945, Nebe was betrayed. A woman he had trusted gave him up to the authorities. He was arrested, brought to Berlin, and put through the same process that had consumed the other conspirators. He was interrogated. He was tortured. He was brought before the People's Court. And on March 21st, 1945, less than 7 weeks before Germany's final surrender, Artur Nebe was hanged at Plötzensee Prison. He was 50 years old. The regime he had served for 12 years and then tried to destroy killed him 6 weeks before it destroyed itself. Now here is the question that Nebe's story forces us to confront. How do we remember him? How do we categorize him? In post-war Germany and in some historical accounts, Nebe has sometimes been presented as a resistance figure, as a man who ultimately chose conscience over complicity, as someone who risked and ultimately gave his life to oppose Hitler. And there is something real in that. He did join the conspiracy. He did take genuine risks. He did die at the hands of the Nazi regime. Those facts are true, but they exist alongside other facts that cannot be erased or minimized. He volunteered to command a unit that murdered 45,000 people. He personally oversaw massacres. He conducted experiments that contributed to the development of mobile gas chambers. He spent years as a senior figure in the Nazi security apparatus, helping it function and helping it extend its reach. The people he murdered on the Eastern Front did not become less dead because he later had second thoughts about the regime. The 45,000 victims of Einsatzgruppe B did not benefit from his eventual turn toward resistance. Some historians have argued that Nebe's participation in the resistance was itself motivated primarily by self-interest. That by 1943 and 1944, it was becoming clear that Germany was going to lose the war. That men like Nebe could read the situation and understood that a Nazi defeat meant accountability for what they had done. That joining the resistance was not a moral awakening, but a calculated bet on the future. that Nebe was not trying to save Germany or stop the killing. He was trying to save himself. We cannot know for certain what was in his mind. We cannot know whether his turn toward resistance came from genuine moral conviction or from calculation or from some combination of both. Human motivation is rarely pure. People are capable of doing terrible things and also of doing brave things. They are capable of genuine transformation and also of self-serving rationalization. Nebe may have experienced both simultaneously. What we can say with confidence is this: Artur Nebe is not a hero. He is not a man whose resistance redeems his crimes. He is a man who participated deeply and voluntarily in some of the worst atrocities of the Second World War, and then, for reasons that remain partly unclear, turned against the regime he had served. His death at the hands of that regime was in one sense a kind of justice, a system devouring one of its own architects. But it was not the justice that his victims deserved. His victims deserved a trial. They deserved acknowledgement. They deserved the world to know what was done to them and who did it. Artur Nebe was both perpetrator and resistor, both murderer and conspirator against murder, both a builder of the Nazi terror apparatus and a man who died trying to dismantle it. His story does not resolve neatly. It does not end with a lesson that is easy to state. What it does is force us to sit with the full complexity of what the Nazi regime was and what it did to the people who served it and the people who opposed it and the people who, like Nebe, somehow managed to be both at the same time. Remember the 45,000 people murdered by Einsatzgruppe B. Remember the patients murdered in Nebe's gas experiments in Mogilev. Remember that before Nebe was a resistance figure, he was a mass murderer. Hold both of those things in your mind at once, because that is the honest way to remember Artur Nebe. An honest remembrance is the only kind that matters. Thank you for watching. If this video was worth your time, please hit the like button. It helps the channel more than you might think. Subscribe if you are not already with us. We cover stories like this every single week. Drop a name in the comments if there is someone you want us to cover next. We read every single one. See you in the next video.